Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We're talking about real estate scams, other common consumer scams, and how to avoid them. The newest one of those ever-popular purple-covered Rich Dad Advisor books releases this month. I'm talking to the author of that book, Scam Proof Your Assets, today on Get Rich Education. Congress just made it possible to get up to $100,000 out of your current 401k or TSP to invest in real estate, gold, or even your own business. That's even if you're still working, and avoid the IRA UBIT tax. The thing is, you can get your money tax and penalty free for a limited time. The EQRP is your secret weapon. With the CARES Act expiring soon, the EQRP company helps you unleash your retirement funds now. Learn more and text message EQRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Concord, New Hampshire to Compton, California, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. You are back in that abundant place where financially free beats debt-free, but scam-free is a pretty good place to be too. Let's talk about how you can be seduced into buying a piece of vacant land for yourself, and that vacant land is almost worthless and has almost zero chance of being valuable for decades. See, this is a real estate trap that's so common that I fell into it one time myself. The way that it works is that banks typically are not interested in lending money to buyers of vacant land. So then the landowner offers you the financing instead. So where instead of making your raw land mortgage payments to a bank, then for you as the buyer, there is no bank, and you make your payments to the owner instead. And unlike a bank, the owner can finance any person that they wish to, so they don't need to stick to these strict requirements in order to entice you in as a borrower. Now, if you've got a low credit score, you can see how you might be enticed to buy raw land that is indeed owner financed or seller financed, because see, they're often not even going to check your credit. In fact, the vacant land deal sounds even better to you because you don't have to go through a lengthier institutional underwriting process, so you can close quick. It sounds really good to you. Owner-financed raw land loans are often going to charge a higher interest rates than banks would, but this still sounds kind of attractive to a prospective buyer like you, because not only does raw land typically cost less than improved land, there's no house or anything on it, so it's an easy way for beginners that have little money to get started, and you can put perhaps only a 10 or 20% down payment on the land and then spread your monthly payments out for a number of years. They're usually not going to go for 30 years, nothing that long in these seller-financed arrangements, but you're really wanting to get in on this deal because it's very approachable, it's low cost, it closes quickly. But you've got to be careful. There are some predatory owners that want to finance you, but they might not even own the land outright themselves. So you would first want to confirm that they indeed do, because the owner can only finance the land for you when they themselves own that land outright, free and clear. That means that they cannot hold a mortgage on the property themselves. That then would be a scam. Now, similarly, but definitely different, some owners that do legitimately own raw land, free and clear, they have a right to finance it to you. That owner, however, can make some pretty extravagant claims about the promise of that land and its potential, its future. They might say that this land is in the path of progress, or it exists next to where a new road is soon going to be built, or let's say that there's already gravel road access to the raw land that you're considering buying with this easy owner financing. Well, that owner might make some pretty extravagant claims to attract you, like saying that you're going to want to buy this land before they pave the gravel road because the price is going to shoot up once the road is paved. Or when they add street lights later on, or if it's a bunch of subdivided lots where you've bought a couple vacant lots, they'll say, well, when this subdivision is 20% built, then the home prices are really going to shoot up. And even if all of those things come true, understand that some of those improvements might not take place for 20 years or 40 years. So your land might not be worth a dime more than you bought it for decades. And a lot of times during all this time, you might also have a property tax obligation. Plus, it's raw land, there's no tenant then, and you've got no income stream from this raw land, all while you're making 10% interest payments to the owner. So these exaggerations of fact, like overhyping that something is in the path of progress, that is what's known as puffing in the real estate agent world. Now, is puffing a scam? I don't know, maybe not quite. The definition of a scam from the Oxford Dictionary is a dishonest scheme or fraud. So, scam or not, those are some of the red flags with owner-financed vacant land, and it does look so enticing and easy to get into. And of course, that doesn't mean that all vacant land is a bad deal. Before we bring in the author of the newest Rich Dad Advisor book, which is about avoiding scams, Garrett Sutton, let's talk about a couple more scams in real estate. What about the foreclosure relief scam? The way it looks is that people who fall on hard times and get behind on their mortgage payments, they can become pretty desperate to save their homes. Well, that's when scammers who do have access to public records of homes in pre-foreclosure, they can swoop in with offers of foreclosure relief to that distressed homeowner and then exploit that homeowner's vulnerability. Scammers claim they can help homeowners save their homes and reduce their mortgage payments if they just pay them a large upfront fee, but often they just end up leaving people in worse financial shape. Some fraudsters claim they're affiliated with the government or a government housing assistance program and can swindle homeowners out of thousands of dollars in fees. And how you can protect yourself here and avoid getting foreclosed on is to work directly with your loan servicer to modify your existing loan or request forbearance or make some other arrangement. And homeowners can enlist the help of HUD-accredited housing counselors to see what options they have, and then include the counselor on a three-way call to their lender in order to find solutions. And a scammer is going to tell you not to talk to your lender, and that right there is the red flag. And see, the problem and why this really happens is that if you're about to lose your home because you can't make the payments, well, then it would be hard for you to speak to your lender when you're in imminent default because you're afraid that that might speed up the whole process then, and you're going to lose your home faster if you involve the lender. So that's why people fall prey to that one. Another common scam is a loan flipping scam. And the victims of this one, they often tend to be older people, okay? Loan flipping, that's when a predatory lender persuades a homeowner to refinance their mortgage repeatedly, refinance it over and over and over again, and oftentimes borrowing more money out with each one of these successive refinances. And the scammer charges high fees and points with each one of these refis, and homeowners get stuck with higher loan payments, and they can't afford that, and they've been duped into borrowing most of their home's equity out. Seniors that have memory impairment, they're really the ones that are vulnerable to these scams. And see, that's because they typically have a pretty big piece of home equity when they're that age. And these predatory lenders convince homeowners they can help them find a better loan product, or really, they often convince these elderly homeowners to do a cash out refinance to pay for home renovations, like a ramp that leads up to their porch because they're so old that they can't do the stairs anymore, and help make their homes accessible as they age in place. And that way they don't have to go to an assisted living home. So see, that's why that scam is so successful. And really the best way that elderly homeowners with cognitive issues, the best thing they can do is involve a trusted friend or a relative. And that person might be you for your parents or your grandparents. And if you've just recently completed a mortgage refinance, it's usually not in your best interest to do another refinance right away. Of course, we avoid all those sorts of situations by using a trusted lender with a long track record like Chaley Ridge at ridgelendinggroup.com. Identity theft is the problem crime in America today, and some people have really different feelings about privacy. Older people tend to be more concerned with privacy than younger people. Younger people let it all hang out there on social media. Some people don't want to have Alexa type devices in their home, and others don't care about having those voice-activated devices in their home. I mean, with me, there are some things that I'm not so private about. In fact, from the street, you can look in the window and see me recording this show right now, and I don't care about that much. In fact, I've had people tell me before that they were walking by out on the street and look right inside the window here in this recording room, and later they tell me, like, yeah, Keith, I think I looked in your window one time, and it looked like you were recording the show right then and there. And yeah, I probably was. Here, I have a large window directly out in front of me that looks out onto a city street, and then I have another pretty big window to my right. Yeah, even if it starts to get dark outside and I have the light on indoors here and it's really easy to look in and see me doing the show, that's fine. I don't really care. There's nothing to hide from. I don't see anyone out there at this moment, however. But in any case, Garrett and I are going to discuss common scams momentarily here. One thing that gets up your scam detector is that sometimes a stranger will reach out to me in an Instagram DM and they seem unusually friendly even if I don't know them. Pretty soon they'll tell me something like, their Instagram is slow, so can we move this chat over to WhatsApp? And no, we can't do that when I don't know you. Oh, and now I see that we don't have any mutual friends. You want to try to get me onto WhatsApp because that way you'll have my phone number. Geez, I mean, just tell people you want to do a Zoom call to see if they're real, and it'll never even come to a Zoom call if they're not real. They'll just go away if they're not real. Hey, well, coming up on the show here in the next few weeks, the transcendent, life-changing Miracle Morning author Hal Elrod will be with us. I'm going to talk to you about getting your hands dirty with hands-on real estate and how to lower your vacancy rate. Of course, I was a property manager and a de facto property leasing agent for my own properties for 5 or 6 years, so I'm going to tell you about some of that experience. Also, I've been a guest on other shows lately, and the hosts often ask me to get out my real estate crystal ball and tell you what I think is next for the housing market. So I'm going to share that here too as I talk about the future of residential real estate and what you need to expect. Let's talk to Garrett Sutton about scam-proofing your assets. Today's guest is the Rich Dad legal advisor, and he's quite a prolific author of books that you might have read, like Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He just freshly authored one of those ever-popular purple-covered books in the Rich Dad series. In fact, the foreword was written by Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. The book's called Scam Proof Your Assets. It releases this month, and I want to hear more about it. Welcome back to the show, Garrett Sutton.
Thank you, Keith. Pleasure to be with you again.
You've been here on the show with us 3 times previously to talk mostly about protecting your real estate with LLCs. And today we're talking about scammers both inside and outside the real estate world. Now, when I think about how to identify a scammer, sometimes it's more difficult and others are pretty easy. If you get an email from the king of Zamunda that asks you to wire him some money so that he can process his visa and move to the United States, well, that'll probably already be in your spam folder, so that's probably not too much of a problem. But tell us some more about how you can identify a scam or a scammer in the first place.
That's the thing, Keith. It's very difficult to identify these people. We're inundated with these scams over the internet, email, over the phone, everywhere. And to identify one of these people is difficult. But when it comes person to person, you wouldn't expect this, but they're very well dressed. I mean, these are con artists. They're hard to pin down on things. They prey on your greed and fear. They're very good at preying on, they know how to push the buttons that will get you to fall for whatever they're selling. And they let you know the clock is ticking. That's part of the game, is to make sure that you realize that this deal is not going to last forever. They play on your fear of losing out.
Yeah.
And they also capitalize on your ignorance. People don't like to ask questions whereby they feel they'll come across as ignorant, and you have to resist that. You have to ask questions. And hopefully, after reading the book, you won't even get into these situations. But if you're in an investment situation and people are making all these great claims, be sure to ask questions of these people, because sometimes they won't be able to handle your questions and you'll know that this is a bad deal.
All right, so they're pretty sophisticated. They know the buttons that they need to push in order to get you to be manipulated and buy into their scam. They're probably not going to be wearing some black hoodie with a hood pulled down low right to where their eyebrows are. They instill this sense of urgency in you, like you better act now or act soon. I really think then, Garrett, is it really incumbent upon us as consumers and citizens to be comfortable with making other people a little bit uncomfortable and ask them some tough questions?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to be investing your hard-earned money, you have to ask questions. You have to protect you and your family first. In situations where you feel somewhat comfortable with the person on an investment level, you still need to ask all of those hard questions. You need to say to the person that I'm going to have my CPA and my attorney involved. And here's a big red flag, Keith. If they say, well, your attorney or CPA wouldn't understand this, or if this is a secret and we don't want you to go to your professionals, just know enough to get up and walk out. Anybody who says that you can't run this by your CPA or an attorney is a scamster, and you've got to just get out of that situation.
Yeah, not all questions are personal when you're vetting an operator or vetting a deal. You can simply ask questions about whether using a system that's encrypted, or if it's in real estate, if they've tried to pump up the net operating income on a property. You can start poking around and asking questions like, well, did you just fill this with tenants that have month-to-month leases? Or is this NOI based on 12-month leases? Or what is it? So I know that you've actually stated 13 different signs of what you call a mark. And a mark in the industry is really just another name for a target. So tell us about these 13 signs so that we can help know if we're becoming a target ourselves or if we're naive about something that we shouldn't be so naive about.
These 13 signs of a mark are really important for people to realize, because it's pretty broad who they go after. The first one is, once a sucker, always a sucker. The AARP did a study, and the best mark is one that's already been taken by a scam. People don't learn the lesson. So that's a really good target. And in fact, there's email lists of people who have been scammed are very valuable. Other scamsters will pay to find out who has been taken before. Now, it's interesting. The second mark is they're elderly. The people who are 70 and up lose $37 billion a year to scamsters. So if you have parents who are older or family members, you may want to counsel them and talk to them about running anything that they come across by you as a younger person to vet whether it's a scam or not, because the elderly are targeted quite frequently. Now, on the other side of the coin, Keith, they're also young. It's interesting. The elderly lose the most money, but millennials are victimized the most often. And they don't have that much to lose, so the elderly lose more money, but they get targeted at a very high rate. You remember when we were young, a young person has an optimism bias. You feel invulnerable. Everything's going to work out.
Right.
But the scamsters take advantage of that. And so the young people are also targeted frequently.
That's true. You wouldn't think that young people would be targeted that frequently because, like you said, first of all, they typically have fewer assets than an older person. You think of so much crime being cybercrime these days. You think of younger people being more savvy. But you bring up a good point. That younger person is less likely to have been burnt. Therefore, they're more likely to be trusting.
Exactly right. And so the scamsters will take advantage of the younger people because, like you say, they haven't been scammed. Number 4 is they're uneducated. So people who haven't gone to college, not necessarily that that's the best education anymore, but people who just haven't had educational experiences, haven't gained what we call critical thinking, the ability to understand what is the whole package going on with the scam, are targeted. They also have an insatiable craving for a good deal. And the scamsters, a lot of times you'll get these calls and you can tell right away it's a scamster, but other people don't. They have this feeling that they're entitled to a good deal, and the scamsters know how to prey upon those people. They're dreamers. They have illusions of superiority and control like gamblers do, and they believe that they can win in this type of environment. They're trusting. They're not cynical. They're often lonely. The AARP survey indicated that 66% of fraud victims feel isolated, right? So they do want to talk to someone. They're isolated. They feel a need to communicate, and the scamsters will take advantage of that. They're coping with difficulties. People have had job losses. They lack self-control. They're easily swayed by friends and family, and so they're easily swayed by the scamsters. So those are some of the targets that are out there. And we call them marks because back in the circus days, a carny would take advantage of someone at the ring toss. And if they were easily taken advantage of, they would put chalk on their hand and pat the person on the back. So they went to the next carny event, and the carny could see on the back of their coat that they had the chalk. And that was the sign that you were a mark. You were literally marked as being an easy prey. So we don't want to be a mark.
That's interesting. Yeah. So those are signs that someone can be a mark. Garrett, I get the feeling that a lot of our listeners are still thinking like, oh no, I won't be taken advantage of. I'm savvy. I grew up with social media. I've had apps in my pocket since I've been a teenager. Like, there's no way anyone's going to take me for a ride. So talk to us a bit more about that and just signs that you really are vulnerable to becoming a victim yourself.
We did a survey with the Rich Dad Company, and we asked, what are some of the things that you're afraid of in everyday life? And one of the big ones was being scammed. And so that's what led to this book, was this survey saying that there's a great fear across a wide variety and section of the population about being scammed. Now, some people believe that they are so sophisticated they will never be scammed. But as the stories in the book indicate, I mentioned one of the signs of mark is being uneducated. Another sign of being a mark is someone who's educated and very vain. And these vanity scams work all the time. So people who think that they would never be a mark, they are very susceptible to being a mark. So what are some of the signs? Well, you get your credit report and you look at it and you thought you were 750 and the number is way down. That's a sign that you've been scammed. Your bank accounts don't jive. The mail stops coming. These are some clear signs that you've been scammed. But a lot of people, and we have examples in the book, don't even pay attention to these factors, Keith. And so if you wait too long, things only get worse. You've got to pay attention to these types of issues on an ongoing basis. It's interesting. We have this technology now that provides us with so many opportunities and advantages. But at the same time, we've got to keep our guard up because this technology is invading our computers and our phones, our iPhones. We just have to be very vigilant.
It's astonishing with the number of errors that are on credit reports, and some of them are less important, trivial things, and some of them are more important that really affect your credit score. And we're highly interested in qualifying for the best loans here to buy more real estate. I want to talk to you more about cybercrime shortly, but let's talk about real estate scams since we're really a real estate investor audience here. And, some of these real estate scams are still cyber scams themselves. And when I think about common real estate scams, Garrett, I think the most common one is where scammers, what they do is they post rental ads on a social media page or on Craigslist or something like that. And they pose like they're the landlord in order to lure in unexpected renters. And sometimes what these scammers do is they use photos from other listings, and then the scammers who don't have any connection to the property or its owner at all, they ask for an upfront payment in order to let prospective tenants see the property and hold that as a deposit. And in reality, what these scammers are doing is they're just looking to get quick cash through nefarious means here. They've got no connection to the property. That's kind of one example I think of as a common real estate scam. What are your thoughts?
That is a very common one, both for rentals and for the sales of property.
Right.
Melissa, my assistant here at Corporate Direct, was looking for a place to rent, and she looked at 10 properties, and Keith, 8 of them were scamsters. She checked with the county assessor's office, and the people who claimed to be owners had no connection to the property. 80% of these were scam listings, and we can talk about it later, but the government needs to start doing something about this. This deception is filling every aspect of our lives, and people need to start going to jail for this. And the government makes no effort to catch these people. So you've mentioned a very common real estate scam, and I would encourage everybody to be extremely cautious about giving money for a down payment or a deposit on the purchase of a property without being absolutely certain that you're dealing with the owner.
That's really interesting to think about. I think one of the most interesting things you said so far is that scammers can sort of collude or communicate with each other. Once they've identified one mark, one gullible person that's fallen victim to a scam, they can sell that contact information to another scammer. So therefore, this can have a domino effect. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Rich Dad Asset Protection Attorney Garrett Sutton. We're going to come back and talk more about what are some of the actionable things that you can do to protect yourself from being the victim of the scam. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Most rental property investors choose either positive cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market can provide both. Jacksonville, Florida. With 9% lower home prices than the national median, 1% higher gross rents, and Jacksonville has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets since 1991. Get positive cash flow today and appreciation for tomorrow. To invest for cash flow and growth in Jacksonville, go to cashflowandgrowth.com. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to 4plexes. They're the #1 lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Hal Elrod, author of The Miracle Morning, and listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Rich Dad legal advisor Garrett Sutton, centering on his new book. It's called Scam Proof Your Assets. Garrett, tell us more about tips that one can adopt in order to heighten kind of their scam radar, whether that's inside or outside the real estate world.
One of the big ones, Keith, is you just have to know if it's too good to be true. It isn't. You just have to know that as part of your everyday course of life. When people approach you with things that are too good to be true, in the book, we talk about bringing back the BS detector. Remember, as kids, we always used to know that this was BS or not. And so I think it's good for people to have a healthy BS detector and question everything. We also have to be aware of the overconfidence effort. We underestimate our potential for deception. We have that optimism bias, and you can't be overconfident in these types of matters. We also need to realize that these scamsters are not only people in a basement in Estonia, but they are our friends and family. I mean, church leaders have been involved in these scams, and relatives and people that have friends at work. So a lot of times it's not the person that you have no idea who they are, but it's someone close to you. So you have to be very careful on that. The other thing is a lot of people will say, well, this deal is a secret. I don't want you telling anyone else about that. And as we mentioned earlier, that is a big red flag. A regular business wants you to proclaim how great they are to others. They don't want you to keep everything a secret. So someone who says this is a secret thing, you can only keep this to yourself, that's a big red flag that you're dealing with a scamster.
Get in first, get in on the ground floor, get in before everyone knows about it and the price runs up. Yeah, these are common flags that you need to look out to for sure. I think it's trusting and vetting people above all else, especially when it comes to real estate deals. And it's so interesting here where we're in such a cyber world. There's still a person, there's still a human being behind every one of those deals. So it's interesting that that's what it comes down to. A lot of times, increasingly, I think it has to do with people that you feel like you know, but you don't really know, oftentimes through Facebook or social media. And there are so many things to consider around social media, whether it's vetting the operator of a deal or you yourself. Do you really want to be sharing your Facebook photos while you're on vacation? I mean, there are pros and cons to that. The trade-off is basically connecting with others while you're on your trip, some that you might even meet on your trip, versus security and people knowing that you're not home. So increasingly, social media use is so important when it comes to that trade-off of connectivity versus security.
Absolutely, Keith. And another social media problem area are these dating sites where many people are lonely and they get on the dating sites and they haven't even really met the person, but somehow the person gets their bank account information and is able to drain their bank accounts from afar. Again, if you have family members who are lonely, isolated, they need contact. They need you to be talking to them and making sure that they are not going on social media and going to be taken advantage of.
That's so interesting. This comes back to that human element again, that element of loneliness. And a lot of studies, including ones of habitual social media users, show that these people are actually more lonely than others. And they're just happy to have what seems like a real and decent human being to have a virtual conversation with. And that can lead into these scams.
These scamsters are just masters at making people feel good. Flattery is a big part of how they get into your world. And so people just have their guard up at all time. I mean, it's sad to say that we have all this interconnectivity, but the interconnectivity is being used against us. And people need to be extremely cautious these days.
Other times, people are physically bringing things into their own home, especially now that we're squarely in this work from home movement. Maybe you want to call it the work from anywhere movement. It makes more and more sense to bump up the security settings on your router with more and more people during the day at home, turning on encryption to make it harder for criminals to get access. We're increasingly getting into this world where we've got smart kitchens and the Internet of Things, even your dishwasher, your microwave, that might be connected to the Internet. So it might be important to change default passwords on devices that do connect to your home network, like your smart TV or a video game console, because manufacturer passwords, they might be available out there on the web. So home security cameras, that might be another place. So I'm thinking about all this technology, physical things that we're bringing into our home that increase our cyber reach.
You make some very good points there, Keith. And I think people after COVID need to be very aware. A lot of people are going to be working from home, but you need to take steps to make sure that you're not exposing your home to these types of cyber criminals.
Now, Garrett, you let me know a few weeks ago that there is something out there called cyber liability insurance. So we're talking about how to protect yourselves from things. Are there really people that are buying cyber liability insurance personally, or is that only companies that purchase something like that?
Typically, it's a business. You're doing business over the internet. You're taking people's credit cards, and you have exposure for criminals that will hack your account, take sensitive information from your customers, and sell that information on the dark web. And so cyber liability insurance will protect you in some of those cases. In some cases, you've got to get your reputation back. So some of these policies allow for public relations efforts. In some cases, the government is going to fine you for this, and the cyber liability policy, properly structured, can help you in that regard. Now, it's interesting, Keith, that the government says, all right, Keith, if your company was hacked, you're responsible for the hack, and the criminal who hacked you goes free. It's just wrong that the government blames the business and the criminal gets off scot-free. And so that's one of the arguments we make in the book, that the government needs to step up the efforts to go after these cyber criminals because they are becoming more and more adept. In the future, Keith, there's a risk that they could bring down power grids. They could bring down hospital systems. These are serious existential threats that we're going to be facing in the future. And the government needs to step it up right now and go after these people.
Yeah, the more you learn and know about the vulnerability, the more remarkable it seems that things like electrical blackouts in large regions aren't more common, and a bunch of other things that really aren't that pleasant to think about, but need to be thought about. The interesting thing that you said is, with the government letting criminals often get away with these sorts of things, that might heighten the importance of one getting insurance. But if one gets insurance, and even if they do have a valid claim with cyber liability insurance, does that give them monetary reimbursement? Because then, even if it does, what does one do about their reputation? If their reputation's damaged and they're looking like a nefarious criminal on the first page of Google.
That's a good point. And these cyber liability policies are somewhat new, and you talk to attorneys in the field, and some of these insurance companies are not paying up on the claims that you paid for the insurance on. But I think it's better to have the cyber liability policy so that if you are hacked, you do have the ability to get some sort of compensation. The other good thing about these policies is the insurance companies will help you streamline your electronic systems to be able to prevent an attack. So there is some good anticipatory actions that you can take, and the insurance companies will help you on that.
A related thought that I have is, if someone does have their reputation damaged and there's some awfully incriminating looking information about them on Google, that's a real problem. And I just wonder, do those reputation websites, do they really help you get your reputation back?
These reputation companies will put enough positive things about you at the top so the negative stuff flows to the bottom. And so that's how they really work. Can you completely get your reputation back? No. Having the cyber liability insurance, I think, is important. If there is a hack, this type of coverage will assist you in remediating the problem, perhaps some public relations to enhance or bring back your reputation if possible. And again, the insurance companies will give you tips on how to avoid it in the first place.
Before I tell our audience how you can help them more, do you have any last things that you can tell our audience about really some of those preventative tips that they can take to avoid being scammed?
One of the big scams is the escrow diversion, whereby you're going to close on a piece of property and you've been given the coordinates to wire the money to, and people will somehow, I don't know how they do it, but they find out that you're involved in a transaction, and they will send you an email saying, this is the new wiring instructions that you're supposed to follow. And people have lost billions of dollars from these scamsters that just insert themselves in the middle of a transaction. It's so widespread that the California Association of Realtors now requires on the contract this warning: do not ever wire or electronically transfer funds prior to calling to confirm the transfer instructions. Only use a phone number you were provided previously. So it's such a big problem that this is now on the state of California Realtors forms. Now, Keith, when I buy a property, I go to the bank, I get a cashier's check, and I drive it to the title company. I'm not wiring the money. So you just have to be extremely cautious when you're dealing in a real estate transaction involving any sort of money, because this is a huge problem for real estate investors.
That's right. When you, the listener, are dealing with your mortgage lender, you'll often see a message in the footer of those emails about precautions to take, about wiring money. Garrett, you've helped people protect their assets and protect their downside for such a long time. You've helped a lot of our audience members for a while. Your new book, Scam Proof Your Assets, comes out soon. Tell us more about that. And then the other ways that you and your company, Corporate Direct, help real estate investors, business owners, and everyday consumers.
As mentioned, the Rich Dad Company found that a lot of people are worried about scams. So that's why I wrote the book, Scam Proof Your Assets. It's available in October on Amazon and other outlets. And we do talk about asset protection in there as well. I have been operating Corporate Direct for over 30 years, and we set up LLCs and corporations in all 50 states. We offer a free 15-minute consultation with an incorporating specialist. So you can call 800-600-1760, 800-600-1760, and we'll get on the phone with you and explain our services and what we charge. Our prices are very affordable. And we'd look forward to working with your listeners, Keith.
And Garrett Sutton's company is named Corporate Direct. You think of Garrett as the Rich Dad legal advisor. You might think they have some exorbitant fees, but they really don't. Their fees really are approachable for most people. His book called Scam Proof Your Assets is out this month. Garrett Sutton, thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Thank you, Keith.
You can report fraud or financial scams to the Federal Trade Commission at ftccomplaintassistant.gov. They also compile and update a list of popular scams that you can look out for over there. Of course, that resource and more material relating to this episode are in the episode show notes, which you can find at getricheducation.com/315. To review some of the things that Garrett and I talked about, if a deal sponsor says that this deal is a secret, that's a red flag. Tell them you want to run this by your CPA or attorney, even if you're not going to run it by your CPA or attorney, and just see what the deal sponsor says. Both the old and young are vulnerable to scams. The less educated are more likely to be preyed upon. Those looking for a good deal, they get scammed more often. Fraud victims tend to be the type of people that feel isolated. Scamsters trade lists of gullible people with each other. That is concerning. And gosh, what is more concerning than that? The government makes little effort to put scammers in jail. More often than not, the government blames the crime on the victim. And you know, many victims are too embarrassed to even file complaints. And that's part of what lets the criminal get away. People that get scammed, they have an optimism bias. It's kind of that old, oh, it'll never happen to me thing. And cyber liability insurance, that can help you take preventive measures against cybercrime. Outside of the scam stuff, Garrett Sutton and Corporate Direct offer you free 15-minute consultations for asset protection. Garrett's the go-to guy for that. He was on the show with us 3 times previously to discuss how to protect your real estate with limited liability companies. And yes, Garrett does LLCs in all 50 states. His contact information is in the show notes at getricheducation.com/315. One way to avoid getting scammed is to be able to identify what a scammer would say and what kinds of things they would ask you and more. So learn about that and more with Garrett Sutton's new book, Scam Proof Your Assets. It is that newest purple book in the Rich Dad Advisor series, and it releases this month. For Rich Dad Advisor Garrett Sutton, with a shout out to everyone here at GRE, Andrea Newbern in operations, sound engineer Bidron Jampo, web designer Nikon Roy, and content manager Mickey Salagano, I'm your host Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.